I'm Annalee Davis, and this is White Creole Conversations, new ways of thinking about whiteness in a Caribbean context. And today I'm here with Evelyn O'Callaghan to talk about the experience of whiteness in the Caribbean. So thanks for joining me, Evelyn. Can you just say what your profession is, first of all?
I'm a professor of West Indian literature at the University of the West Indies, Cape Hill campus.
Okay. And can you, I'd begin the conversations by asking people to define themselves in terms of race, class, and nationality. Can you do that?
Define myself in terms of race? I would have to, I suppose, in the extant vocabulary in the Caribbean, I would call myself red.
Okay.
Because, yes, I'll get back to that. Red or white, I suppose. I don't consider myself to be either of those things, but that is what I would be called.
Okay.
Class, I guess I'm middle class, professional. And what was the other thing?
Nationality.
And nationality, I'm Jamaican. I have Irish parents, but I'm Jamaican. I was born in Nigeria, but I'm still Jamaican because that's the only place I know from childhood.
Right, okay. Do you identify with the term white Creole at all?
Not really, because a white Creole, in the correct definition linguistically, is a white person born in the Caribbean. And usually white Creoles come from a long line of white people born in the Caribbean, and I don't fit that profile, so no.
Okay. Do you find yourself thinking about whiteness at all, or race in general?
Well, I think if you're, I wasn't born here, but I grew up in Jamaica, in Kingston, we came to Jamaica from Nigeria when I was 3, and I don't remember anything else but. And if you grow up as a minority in a largely black country, of course you think about whiteness all the time. You can't not. I was educated here in Jamaica, and I have taught at UWI, Mona and Cape Hill, and of course race is absolutely sewn into the fabric of Caribbean society, which was obviously made from a multiplicity of races and on a very racial hierarchy. So yes, plus I'm professor of literature, and it's a very profound thread running through all of Caribbean literature still.
Okay. So would you say, having been transplanted to Barbados, which may obviously feel different than it was in Jamaica, would you say that this local environment that you've been living in for some time operates as a racially ordered, segmented society, or does it operate more as an integrated space or both?
I think when I first came here, and that was in 1983, I was utterly shocked at how the system of self-determining apartheid seemed to operate here. In Kingston, where I grew up, and then Montego Bay, and then back in Kingston, where my working life took place, never have I seen that degree of racial separation in terms of social occasions. So that I remember my husband and I being the only white people at a party, and other places where there were no black people at all. So it was kind of shocking, to be honest. I think because I'm at UWI, which is much more mixed and integrated, not just in terms of race, but also class and nationality, I was kind of spared from having to choose, because I think at that time, that's almost what I would have experienced Barbados as being, you had to choose which side were you going to be on. And I truly found it exceptional from any other part of the Caribbean I've ever lived in. Trinidad isn't like that. St. Lucia's not like that. Guyana I haven't lived in, so I can't say. And certainly Jamaica isn't like that. So extremely segmented racially when I first came. I think a lot less so now. However, it's also very, very integrated, because black and white Bajans have much more in common than any of them do with me, even though I've been here 30 odd years. That's the way I feel. I feel very much an outsider here, but not because I'm white, because I'm not a Barbadian.
Okay. Did you grow up in a family that spoke about race at all? Did you inherit any ideas about race or whiteness in your family? Was it something that was discussed when you were a child growing up?
I don't know if it was explicitly discussed, but you couldn't, again, as I said, you could not live in Jamaica, and especially at the time that I was in sixth form, it was the 70s, the 60s, the 70s, race was very much on the agenda, and of course we spoke about it. And I'm fortunate, I think, because my parents were not first generation, they were new to Jamaica, and they came with obviously very little prejudices. They're both of Irish extraction, and so they have a profoundly anti-British, anti-colonial mindset, which worked quite well with the way that we were taught history and literature at school. And they were absolutely keen that none of us have any kind of airs and graces in terms of racial superiority, recognizing the fact that we did have more money than many people, and we were going to be privileged because of being, white-skinned and sometimes perceived as tourists in Montego Bay. But no, I'm very fortunate that my parents raised me to be completely open to all people, race, class, gender.
So can you talk a little bit about your primary and secondary school experience in terms of what it felt like or looked like racially, and was there a transition that happened from primary to secondary?
No, not at all. I really can't remember kindergarten, but I went to both prep schools. We used to call them prep schools. Both primary schools that I went to were private, church-run, which means the government gives some aid, but the church makes up the rest of it. Mount Immaculate Conception in Kingston and Mount Alvernia, because my parents are Catholic. Mount Alvernia Prep in Montego Bay when we moved up there when I was 9 years of age. And it was extremely mixed. A very small minority were white. The only thing that differed, everyone, Indian, black, white, Chinese, all kinds of mixes, a couple of Venezuelans who came to board. No, I would not say so.
And the same at secondary?
And the secondary would possibly have been a bit more percentage black, I suppose, but the same girls and boys, well, the same girls that we went to prep school with, came into high school as well. Because it was a much, much bigger high school, there were probably a larger percentage demographically of black girls than the other mixes, but still very, very representative. I mean, in my high school, first form, I was one of 3 white girls, and then by the time we got up, one of 2. So it wasn't very different from primary school.
Right. Do you remember anything about how history would have been taught in secondary school? Is there anything in particular about history? Were you taught at that time mostly British or European history or versus Caribbean history?
I do not come from the Dark Ages, madam.
But the syllabuses have changed. The syllabi has changed quite a lot in the last 30 years in terms of what's being taught in the schools.
Then I am on the Dark Ages because I haven't been in high school for 30 years. How was history taught? Personally, I didn't care for it too much, but we did the usual Greek and Roman civilization. We moved forward to definitely there was, and I did it right up to sixth form. There was the Tudors. I did the Tudors, and I know that pretty well. So there was British history. There was a lot of Caribbean history, and not much African.
Okay.
But there was a lot of Caribbean history.
Right.
Caribbean and what I would now term post-colonial history. I would say that was the focus.
Was there any tension around that?
No? Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
In what respect?
Well, I mean, some of the people that I've spoken to about this have felt some kind of awkwardness around the teaching of about the transatlantic slave trade, the way that it's been taught.
Yes, well, no, I can see that because when my sons, both of whom were born in Barbados, went to school, and Jesse in particular, the eldest, loved history, but he began to complain because he said the syllabus is all about slavery, Africa, slavery, Africa. There's no history of any other part of the world or any other group of people. So I can see that. Mm-hmm. I think that probably is a retrogressive step because it bores them.
Right.
And it also doesn't really prepare kids to see the wider picture.
Right.
So, yes, I am aware of that. I don't know if it is still the case because CAPE has, I'm sure, been alerted to the fact that, doing 3 SBAs all on the same subject matter does not produce a well-rounded student. But it wasn't the case when I was at school.
Can you talk about what makes you feel that you've said that in some ways you feel disconnected in Barbadian society. Can you talk about what makes you feel that you belong or you don't belong in Barbadian or Caribbean society?
What makes me feel I belong or don't belong?
Mm-hmm. Like what do you connect with? What makes you, or is that something that is even of interest to you? Do you consider ideas about belonging or not belonging?
No, I don't. I have never been tortured by that because, in a sense, I come from so many places and so many different backgrounds that I have no choice, really. I know nothing except the Caribbean. I've been away to school. I was educated in Ireland and in Oxford, and I've done stints in Australia and Belgium and all kinds of places. But I knew very early on that no matter where I went, I was coming back to the Caribbean. Initially, it was Jamaica. Now it's Barbados, and I wouldn't have any problem living for a while in Trinidad or one of the other islands, campus territories, because I'm an academic. That's all I can do. That's what I have been doing, and that is what I've committed to. So that's what I belong to. And what makes me feel I belong? Being with the people that I know, being with the people who accept me for what I am. I think there's something wonderful about not belonging to any one group or camp. And I think I can identify with people from quite a few places, quite a few disciplines, ideologies, mindsets, etc. And I guess that makes me comfortable because I think you have to be here in this region an awfully long time to feel that way. And I think it's a gift that other people who come from outside don't have.
Okay. Would you say that we can escape race in Barbados or in the Caribbean? Are we anywhere near to being a post-racial society? Is this something that we should even be working towards?
I'm not entirely sure I know what a post-racial society is. I'm not sure we're anywhere near to that anywhere in the world. But I think that we have to be aware of race in Barbados because it's something much more than I think. There's no, solid statistical basis for this, but I do feel that it is something that is way more on the surface here in Barbados, and paradoxically, because it is not talked about, it becomes even more powerful as a discourse. And when it is talked about, it's always in this dreadful knee-jerk binary opposition that's so manipulated for political or other kind of I would almost say unethical use, that until that is dealt with, until people speak about issues of race and prejudice and resentment and stereotyping, and get it out in the open and deal with it, as I do with my students, and there's never any discomfort. I mean, white Bajans in the class, will admit quite openly, but way back in my family, there were at least 2 or 3, some we know about, some we don't, some are not talked about. 2 or 3 people of different ethnicity, different phenotype. But somehow or other, once it gets into the public domain, everybody feels it's what I was saying. You have to pick sides. You have to be this or that. And I so resent that kind of essentialization, So it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be talked about, but in a rational and respectful way, not in the kind of silly, spiteful, stereotypical and essentializing way that it is currently done in a lot of fora.
Okay. Can you remember if you've had a particularly difficult conversation around race? Something that's, that you felt awkward or uncomfortable? Have there been?
Not really in the Caribbean, because I grew up, I think, in the 70s. I did my sixth form, grew up 60s and 70s, which was a very progressive time in Jamaica. I did sixth form. I was fortunate enough to do sixth form with the guys at Cornwall College because we didn't have enough teachers to mount a fully fledged sixth form at Mount Alvernia. And these were guys from very, 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 poor and working class areas that had made good. And they were very militant and very radical. And we all read the same books. We all read Eldridge Cleaver and Malcolm X. And we were all, part and parcel of Manly's literary society. It just went across the board. Whatever colour you were, whatever class you were, you believed in this possibility of a better Jamaican, a better Caribbean. And then, of course, I came back and went to UWI, and that was in the 80s, and there was the Grenada Revolution. So I think politics is the most important thing to me. So I've never had an uncomfortable conversation in the Caribbean. The place I find it extremely uncomfortable is in the States, in America. And I was at a conference of Caribbean women writers and scholars, as they called it, in some place in Florida. I think it's called Hollywood. And I wasn't actually at this one session where some white American Fulbright students that had come and done work at Cave Hill came to me and said that they were asked to leave the room, that basically this session was only for the black women participants. And I felt extremely uncomfortable about that, on their behalf and on behalf of the people who asked them to leave the room. And any of that kind of thing it doesn't make me uncomfortable, it makes me angry. My blood starts to boil, and were I them, nobody would have moved me out that room. Nobody. I pay my fees just like all of them.
Right.
And I think it was out of order and tacky. But I wasn't there. I don't know what the painful discussion that they were all having, that they didn't feel comfortable with white women in the room as well as black women. But that makes me uncomfortable. That makes me very uncomfortable.
So it raises issues to do with either shame, or that's maybe what the conversation is supposed to be about?
Or maybe the conversation is about, you be ashamed because you happen to be this colour, so you can't listen to what we're talking about, because what we're talking about is how much we hate people of your colour. Anything like that. It's anti-intellectual. It goes back to very, very basics. I mean, we all know that race is a construct that's so over-determined. And there's almost a conspiracy in keeping that knowledge hidden so that we all know in a very simplistic way what race is, because somebody's interest is served by keeping it to that very basic level. Somebody's interest is served in dividing in order to rule. Somebody's interest is served is saying you must maintain this ancestral dislike of the other because the other is not you. I mean, that's dangerous. Mm-hmm. And as I said, both anti-intellectual and manipulative. And I can't buy into that.
Okay. Would you say that you've ever experienced privilege because of your whiteness or being perceived as being white?
Yep, definitely. Again, this is the Caribbean, particularly as my home is Montego Bay. And Montego Bay, like a lot of Barbados, is very much dependent on tourists. And tourism is, unfortunately, an industry that, as practiced in our part of the world, does look at people's skins in terms of what money they have. And so going to school in my uniform, nobody would pay me bad mind. No one would harass me or anything like that. But if I was out on a weekend in my normal clothes, I would be hassled as a white girl, but I could also walk into some of the hotels and get no hassle at all. So on the one hand, I'd be hassled because, the pimps would come up to me and say, hey, Miss Lady, the usual rubbish. Mm-hmm. You want to buy some aloes? And on the other hand, I could, and it's the same in Barbados, I can walk into places that are meant for tourists because the average stereotype of a tourist is a white foreigner. And probably people talk about getting better service. That's not the case in Barbados. I don't think that Barbadians particularly like serving anyone who's not perhaps American or British that they can clearly see as a tourist, but anyone else is a kind of an in-between, and they don't particularly like serving people of my complexion, and I don't get privilege there. But in certain places I have been, I know that, again, I think it has to do with money. At the duty-free shops, people will come up to me before they'll go up to somebody else.
Do you socialize along race or class lines? Do you cross boundaries in terms of race and class in your social and professional life? I would say that
not. I cross all kind of racial boundaries, but I think the class boundary is something that's just endemic. I would socialize more with people who are educated, who are professionals, who are relatively liberal and open-minded, people who have traveled, people who are a bit more like me, regardless of what nationality they are. And at the university, less so perhaps in terms of class, but they're all, well, you see, that's it. Whatever class people come from, once they become upwardly mobile, once they become professional, once they become academics, they are then middle class. So, no, I would say my socializing in terms of work or pleasure is largely middle class.
But integrated racially.
But integrated
right.
racially. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any humorous experience that you might share which relate to being white, or have you had anything funny that you could think of, any funny stories around whiteness?
Yes, a couple. One is the way that every time I go back and I take out my Jamaican passport and they see I was born in Nigeria, and that's the first part. And then the second part is that my husband is my husband's last name is Kingston. So the two combined just render them speechless with mirth, Welcome back, Miss Kingston. And then, you're really born in Nigeria? So I have to go through that, which actually is funny the first couple of times and then gets very tiring. What I liked, what the other thing I was just thinking about the other day actually is when I was walking across the grounds at Mona, at UWI Mona in Kingston. I just love the permeability of racial categories in certain parts of the world. So you pass a group of guys from maintenance and they're doing some kind of maintenance work, and they do what Jamaican and Caribbean men will always do when any woman under 50 passes them. They call out to you and they comment on you. So here is me now. That was my, it's my first job, and I'm 20-something, and I'm very, trying to be dignified. And so the guys call out, hey, white lady. So I put on my impervious face and hold myself aloof and continue. And then one of them says to the other one, go ahead, and a white lady that, see, she's a nice browning. No, I think they went through red first. Is a red lady, hey, red lady, here. And I didn't respond to that either. So I think the guy cracked up and says, and at that point he got what he wanted, because I burst out laughing and smiled at them. So I guess that was it, When are you white but not? Right. When are you white but not quite? When are you brown but up?
And I guess finally, can you think about what an ideal Barbadian or Caribbean society looks like in racial terms? What can we do to work towards that reality, or how do we envision a future racially in the Caribbean?
Oh boy, I would be slaughtered for anything I put up. I think it starts in primary school. I really do. And this is a tough one, because every parent wants to give their children the best education that they can afford. But the difference between the government primary schools in Barbados and the private primary schools is huge, as far as I can see, in terms of demographic. And I know quite a few people of Indo-Caribbean descent and others who deliberately sent their children to primary schools that were not private, because they said, you're going to live in this country and you are going to need to be with every different rank and type of society, black, white, middle, working class, upper class. Sending kids to this little privileged, and I mean, I as I said, I sent mine to that because it was a better school, to St. Gabriel's, but I found St. Gabriel's quite well integrated, I have to say. But even then, and this is like 20 odd years ago, the convent was less so and St. Winifred's was way less so. And when you saw the little toddlers, hugely in St. Winifred's, hugely white. I think if you do that to the age of 11 and then throw them into the government secondary schools, of which, I mean, most people go to now, I gather there are still some private schools for girls, and I think one or two is opening to boys. But at the time my guys went, there wasn't. There was one private school for girls, that was the convent, and there was none for boys. You run, the kids have a big adjustment to make. And I think it would be way better if some form of education was was implemented, that children would be together because they are the ones who are so tolerant. They're the ones who don't give a damn about what kind of hair this one have and what kind of home they go to, and I know that because that's the way I was brought up and that's the way my children were brought up. It's only when they get to that kind of 9, 10 age, when the adult world is not closing in on them, but impacting on them big time, that they start to notice differences, and then they start to clique with those that look like them, with those that their parents are friendly with, that their parents are friendly with their parents. And by the time they get to high school, they're already a little self-defined elite. And I think as long as that persists, I mean, that's not to say there's not the same kind of thing among others. I mean, I know Combermere prided itself on being a very, a black school, and would like to maintain that way. There are groups of them that are very proud of the fact. But I think kids are so prone to peer group pressure that if that's compounded by adult pressure to be with these people, not those people, you're really kind of damning them very early to a negative and divisive mindset. That's something I would like to see. I don't have the answers because, there's freedom of choice. It's a democracy. But right now, compared to the other countries that I have lived in and visited, that seems to me to be the avenue for segregation.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts or comments you have?
Again, I wish that more people in power would commit to hosting an open and rational and measured conversation about racial differences and inequalities, their historical antecedents, and their current representations in the world of the media and popular culture, and have the guts to interrogate some of those things instead of falling into the trap of just using them to berate your opponent, using them to gain popular support. You're an intelligent person. You're government minister. You know perfectly well that it's not true that all white people are out to exploit and manipulate you, and you're an intelligent person, and you know that not all black people are out to hate and discriminate. I mean, stop feeding into that ridiculous propaganda. I guess I would like to see an open and honest conversation, but I don't know when that day will come, because Barbadians seem to me to much prefer to quarrel in private than to speak out in public and have the guts to be criticised for what they believe in.
Okay.
That's about it.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you very much.